सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Five Eyes Alliance is in focus right now. We tell you today the 5 W's and 1 H of it, that is the what, where, who, why, when and how. Chances are that you being very smart know a lot of this because almost everybody and their uncle and aunt and nephew and niece has been doing what is Five Eyes kind of explainer. This is the season of explainers, that's much in fashion. However, we try to bring some perspective, some insight, and also look at where do we go from here, because Canada and India are now, they are not at war, but at least they are at a war of words. And while we'll be talking about deadly, serious and boring espionage and intelligence stuff, I will also ask you to please hang on, because I'm also going to end this episode with a short conversation with my brilliant colleague Jyoti Yadav, one of our reporters, who's now done, among the many fine stories she's done, a really fine story, a great work of investigative journalism on Bhavri Devi. Remember the name? If you don't see the picture on your screens, but if you don't remember the name, hang on, don't Google just now. As I finish talking about stuff like espionage, eavesdropping, spying, shared interest, conflicted strategic interests, geopolitics, etc. I will have Jyoti Yadav with me and I'll be in conversation with her. Now, Canadians have been using words. India has used some action as well, and that action will now lead, chances are, to a drastic reduction of the diplomatic staff employed by Canada in India. We'll soon be carrying a story, maybe by the time you're watching this, that story is already published, because our stories go through a very rigorous editing process. If it's published by then, I will share a link with you, or we'll share a link in the course of time. India has 35 diplomats in Canada. Canada has more than thrice as many as that in India. So India said yesterday in their statement that this is really oversized. There should be parity of numbers. There should also be parity of ranks. So Canada has 1 High Commissioner, 2 Deputy High Commissioners, right? India has a High Commissioner. Then Canada has many other officials and something like 13 or 18 attaches. I mean, now as long as the going was good, the relationship was friendly, that of near allies or likely allies, it was all right. But now things have got really bad between the two countries, and actions coming from India right now, action in anger, the words in anger are coming from Canada. If you watch Justin Trudeau's little press conference at the UN yesterday, last night, our time, New York time in the morning, and I will share also a transcript with you, he was asked several times in that press conference, how come the other allies of the Canadians, the Five Eyes allies, have not responded in the same tone. They haven't condemned India, they haven't joined in Canada, they haven't issued a joint statement. They have, however, issued their individual statements. Those statements, they will run on my screen, you can see them. The highlights of those statements, those are boilerplate statements that Canada has made these allegations are serious, they should be investigated, justice should be done, and India should cooperate. It stops at that. However, this went a step further when Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, appeared at a White House presser, and he said, specifically referring to this case, that there is no special exemption for any country in such an event, that these cases, these allegations are serious, they should be investigated. So that was one step further from boilerplate, from the boilerplate definition. So this was one step further, so maybe the Canadians can draw some comfort from it. The important thing, however, is that another story came out of the Canadian press, in this case from CBC, but originating from Associated Press. And that said that Canadian sources, this is source-based, Canadian sources told Associated Press that they had made these allegations and they had become wise to this killing, that probably, likely, allegedly, that there was some Indian role, inspiration, instigation, something behind the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar from information provided to them another major ally from the Five Eyes Alliance. Now, Five Eyes Alliance allies share all intelligence among themselves. This is a treaty. This is a treaty condition. Now, then this story came out, speculation started immediately as to which ally could be. So, immediate suspicion would be on the usual suspect, the Americans, because they have the largest, the most extensive electronic surveillance and intelligence, electronic, cyber, satellite. They vacuum clean a lot of the global communication. They vacuum clean communication from submarine, internet cables, etc., etc. So the suspicion was that perhaps it's the Americans, but it could be any of the others. And that's how our attention was drawn to the Five Eyes Alliance and what exactly does it mean. Now, in fact, if you see this transcript, you can see that Trudeau is walking on eggshells. He's asked repeatedly, what about your allies? How come their response to this seems to be muted? How come they are not attacking India as you are? And he said, he continues to say that this is about Canada. Canada is a country with the rule of law. We also want the international rules-based order followed, but he is not referring to his allies. In fact, in the entire transcript, or if you listen to the press conference, he mentions his allies only once. He said, we are doing this along with our allies. Otherwise, he doesn't talk about his allies. So that tells us the second thing, that however close-knit these five countries might be in terms of their larger, broader strategic interest, each one has their own sovereign interests as well. And as I go along, I will tell you, I'll give you a few examples of how that plays out. So first of all, what is Five Eyes Alliance? Five Eyes Alliance, the Five Eyes are Australia, USA, Canada, United Kingdom and New Zealand, the five English-speaking democracies. This is the alliance of the Anglosphere, as it is called. In fact, the justification comes for this alliance from a speech that Winston Churchill delivered in 1946. This was just after the World War had ended, World War II had ended, and the Soviet Union had created its own bloc, and that's when the Cold War began. So 1946, he made his famous or infamous, depending on which side of the debate you are, famous or infamous Iron Curtain speech. In that speech, there was a para that I quote for you. Winston Churchill said, "Neither the sure prevention of war nor the continuous rise of world organization will be gained without what I have called the fraternal association of English-speaking peoples." That's how this alliance of the Anglosphere came in. That's why Australia, Britain, Canada, US, UK, New Zealand, English-speaking peoples. And then he went on to say, this means a special relationship between British and Empire and the US. Empires in this case means Australia, New Zealand and Canada. So Britain, Empire and the US. And then he says the continuance of the intimate relationship between our military advisors leading to common study of potential dangers. So he laid out this agenda, and then he went on to say, I told you this was his Iron Curtain speech. Then he went on to say that this kind of an alliance is needed to be the guardian of peace and stability in a world where Soviet communists have lowered the Iron Curtain across Europe. That is why it is called the Iron Curtain speech. This is when this alliance making started. The alliance making actually had come into place in 1941, and I will come to that in just 1 second. Now, in 1941, by 1940-41, as the US was getting more involved in the Second World War, both US and Britain realized, happily for them, that they could break, each one could break the early Japanese and German codes, or early Japanese and German cipher. So they began exchanging notes. As they began exchanging notes, they thought they should deepen this relationship. To deepen that relationship, they began meeting. First such talks over code breaking had started in November 1940. In Feb 1941, American code breakers were invited to the British facility which did the same work, and then they came up with a kind of agreement which came into place in 1941. By 1943, it had acquired a name, the BRUSA Agreement. BRUSA is very simple, Britain and USA. In 1946, on 5th of March 1946, exactly on the day when Churchill gave his Iron Curtain speech, this alliance was formalized into what was then called UK-USA alliance. Now, UK-USA alliance came in, but its charter, the agreement, the treaty were all kept classified. In fact, they were kept classified for a very long time. Now we have the declassified version available, and I will quote from that a little bit, but this was kept classified. Then I remember I told you in yesterday's episode 1313, that Canada usually follows a couple of years after America, but they always follow America. So in 1948, Canada joined this alliance. In 1956, Australia and New Zealand joined this alliance. So that's how this Five Eyes came into being. Now you might ask me, all right, 5 countries, but why did they call it Five Eyes Alliance? Good question. Five Eyes Alliance, because that means that these nations will share amongst themselves all the information that have of a certain classification. Now, classification in the world of spying and secrecy, the highest level of classification is eyes only, for your eyes only. So that means Five Eyes Alliance means the 5 allies in this alliance will share all their eyes only communication, which is the top level secret intelligence communication. That's how the name Five Eyes came in. Now, by this time, by 1946-48, both countries, US and UK, had begun exchanging their encryption machines. The US would send theirs to Britain, Britain would send theirs to the US, and as this alliance progressed, Soviets also improved at their end, and the Cold War raged. As the Cold War raged, both sides upped the game electronically and also in terms of satellite. There was also human intelligence, but the primary agents from each country, the primary agencies from each country which participated in this alliance were the electronic intelligence organizations, electronic, or in those days phone intelligence, or phone or cable telegraph intelligence organizations. So for the US, the agency has been National Security Agency, NSA. For UK, it's been Government Communication Headquarters, which is the premier electronic intelligence and surveillance agency of the United Kingdom. Then for Canada, it's been the Communication Security Establishment, CSE. For New Zealand, Government Communication Security Bureau, GCSB. For Australia, it's the Australian Security Intelligence Organization, or ASIO. The Treaty of 1946, I told you, was kept qualified. It was later declassified by 2010. We had the full treaty available. And I will quote from that treaty, and it's a quote, and it's a bit complicated, and I'll tell you why it's a bit complicated. That's my guesswork, but I don't think it's bad guesswork. The treaty says, and there's a para, and I quote, and I will not paraphrase it because the beauty lies in how complex this is. It says, and I quote, "The parties agree to the exchange of the products of the following operations related to foreign communications, collection of traffic, acquisition of communication documents and equipment, traffic analysis, crypto analysis, decryption and translation, acquisition of information regarding communication organizations, practices, procedures and equipments." Now, when you read this, or when I read this for you, you will say this is so repetitive, right? I could have said this in maybe 20 words, right? But that is not how it was written, and that's the reason I said I have a good guess, educated guess on why this is so long-winded, because I think my guess is, it's a very simple guess, there is no secret, that this is written by a true British bureaucrat. And those are the ones from whom all our bureaucracy learned to write this kind of prose. Because How else do you take 200 words or 150 words to write something that you can say in 15, because a lot of it is repetitive. That besides, let me now move on to the more substantive issues. Now, this treaty was kept so secret, in fact, that the story goes that when Gough Whitlam took over as Prime Minister of Australia, he wasn't even aware of the treaty, right? It was kept that much of secret. Remember, this was the era of the Cold War. 2010, as I told you, the text was released, and then this treaty and this organization were formally recognized. Until now, these were seen as fairly secret. Now, notionally at least, this organization divided the world between these countries, 5 countries, geographically, maybe with some idea as to each one's range and skills and resources and quote unquote assets, right? So for UK it was Europe, West Asia, Middle East, Hong Kong, UK was the colonial power in Hong Kong, तो अपने बाप का राज था वहाँ पे, right? But the Chinese were very active in Hong Kong and vice versa. Hong Kong was a part of China, right? Hong Kong was also traditionally the home of China watchers. So Hong Kong was Britain's responsibility. No surprise, it was a British colony also until 1997, as I said, Baap ka Raj. US had the Middle East, China, Russia, Africa, the Caribbean. Now, if the Americans were really so plugged into the Caribbean, right, and if they still are, I'd like to know how come the West Indies cricket talent has all disappeared, and how come the West Indies can't produce a fast bowler, a genuine fast bowler anymore, because the Americans are supposed to know everything there is to know about the Caribbeans. That's a joke, leave the joke out. One of the reasons I felt so constrained to tell you, or so tempted to tell you, that flat joke, and it came actually from the heart, because I feel gutted like any other cricket fan that the great West Indies this time have not qualified to play in the Cricket World Cup. That said, come to the next country, New Zealand. South Pacific, yes, close enough to New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. Australia, South and East Asia. Canada, interiors of Russia, China and Latin America. Now, in India, we will always wonder which one of the 5 or which one of the 4, because Canada is the one that was informed, which one of the remaining 4 informed Canada or spied on Indian diplomats, or claims to have spied on Indian diplomats, or eavesdropped on Indian diplomats and Indian communication, and told the Canadians something, if they did find out something, as the claims go. It could be the Americans, as I told you earlier, usual suspects, but if you look at this geographical distribution, it could be the Australians as well, but it doesn't really matter who it was. The fact is that the Canadians have leaked this. We have to think about why have the Canadians leaked this, because if they've spoken to Associated Press on background basis, they've only done it because they wanted the world to know. And to me, it looks like that was some kind of a retaliation to the actions India took on visas yesterday, and also on scaling down, asking the Canadians to scale down their own diplomatic presence in India to parity levels. That is a really drastic cut. So this is really something that hurts the Canadians, because they did not send all these diplomats to India because they were sitting underemployed or unemployed in Ottawa, and they had to give them jobs someplace. This is not the Justin Trudeau Garib Rozgar Yojana or employment plan for unemployed diplomats in Canada. They were sent to India because the Canadians saw the need to have these people, and if they are sent back, that hurts the Canadians, and also it hurts their image, and that's the reason I think these leaks were made yesterday. Now, what is it that Five Eyes Alliance has been doing all this while? And I will tell you a couple of interesting things. Now, Five Eyes Alliance, generally it's said that their intelligence work is the gold standard in global intelligence. Certainly, despite all that, they failed to pick up the two Pokhran tests, 1974 and 1998. But that besides, they've done a lot of good work, they've caught a lot of things, and they've also done some joint action. Lately, however, they began to change their agenda. Until 2020, it was all about intelligence gathering and sharing, basically security, foreign affairs. In 2020, they widened it to also promoting human rights and democracy across the world. That changed the agenda, and that's what the Canadians might be looking at right now. In 2020, they issued a rare joint statement, something they don't usually do. They issued a joint statement condemning Chinese national security law for undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. But whenever they've issued a joint statement against China, one of the members has balked. And that member is New Zealand, because New Zealand really depends on exports to China. So New Zealand, I told you that while these countries have a lot of shared interests, they also have their individual sovereign interests, and no country sacrifices their sovereign interests. Similarly, the Australians, the Canadians, even the Americans, they all had their own relationships, alliances going with China. It's only in the last 3-4 years since they all began to see Xi Jinping in their nightmares. One thing common amongst all these countries is that they have a common nightmare. रात में जब सपने आते हैं ना, भूत आते हैं, जब मदरवुड से हनुमान चालीसा पढ़ो, right? वो इन सब के लिए, that for all of them is Xi Jinping. When they see Xi Jinping's face, then they wake up at night in cold sweat. So that made them close ranks, and that's when the talk also started of somehow bringing other countries. So September 2021, Australia, UK and US, they signed the AUKUS agreement. Later, Canada said they were willing to also join AUKUS. But remember, New Zealand, although they are so close to the Australians, of course we know they hate the Australians when it comes to this sporting field, be it cricket, hockey, rugby, anything. But they are the closest allies and friends, and really a fraternal power to Australia, albeit smaller, which New Zealanders would never acknowledge or would hate to acknowledge. But they again balked at the idea of being in AUKUS. But Canadians were willing. Now, looking ahead, there's been a lot of discussion on expanding Five Eyes. So this discussion has talked about bringing other potential allies: Israel, Germany, South Korea, Japan, and lo and behold, even India. And this is not a joke. This is something that's even happened formally. So in 2019, US Congress Committee, led by Representative Adam Schiff, they recommended that India, Japan, and South Korea should be brought in on a par for intelligence sharing, on a par with the other Five Eyes members. In 2020, India plus Japan joined the Five Eyes Alliance in appealing to smartphone companies to permit backdoor access to encrypted apps on their phones. So India and Japan, although not members of the Five Eyes Alliance, issued this statement jointly with them, asking smartphone companies to open the back door to intelligence agencies from obviously democratic countries with shared values to encrypted apps on their phones. So the Five Eyes Alliance needs Asian partners, and the three Asian partners, most likely Asian partners, are Japan, South Korea, and India. And why not? Even Israel, to that extent, is an Asian partner. But you see, many of these countries have their own sovereign interests. Israel has its own sovereign interests. Israel has a relationship with China, a very close relationship with China. Israel balances China and America and keeps its strategic autonomy. India has its own interests. Each country also weighs its sovereign interests with its shared interests and shared values. So as I promised you in the beginning of this episode of Cut the Clutter, I have with me Jyoti Yadav. Jyoti, I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you. We could have done it any time, maybe more than a dozen times over the past few months, because you do a stellar story every now and then, right? I've lost count. But this one in particular is really special. So story of Bhavri Devi. संक्षेप में बताइए कि भावी देवी की कहानी क्या है, और कहानी तो पुरानी है, तो उसमें अब नया क्या है?
हमारी कहानी में नया ये है कि भंवरी को जिस 9 महीने की बच्ची की चाइल्ड मैरिज रुकवाने के लिए ये
9 महीने की बच्ची की शादी हो रही थी, उस शादी रोकने के लिए भंवरी देवी ने कोशिश की। उस कोशिश की वजह से गांव में जो पेट्रियार्की वाले लोग होते हैं, जो कहते हैं तू कौन होती है रोकने वाली, उन्होंने उसके साथ अत्याचार किया, वो अत्याचार बताइए क्या हुआ?
भंवरी के साथ गैंगरेप हुआ, उनके हस्बैंड को पीटा, उन्हें भी पीटा।
हस्बैंड के सामने हुआ?
बिल्कुल, उनके हस्बैंड के सामने हुआ ये गैंगरेप। और ये सेशंस कोर्ट ने जो अक्यूज थे उनको इस रेप केस से बरी कर दिया। तो इस केस को 30 साल हो गए थे, और 30 साल के बाद हमने उस 9 महीने की बच्ची को ट्रेस किया जो आज 32 साल की बाई देवी है। और बाई की कहानी पैरेलली भंवरी की कहानी के साथ चल रही है, और हमने उन 2 औरतों की कहानी को इस स्टोरी में रखा है।
तो भंवरी देवी को कभी इंसाफ मिला नहीं?
जी, उनको कोर्ट से इंसाफ नहीं मिला। हालांकि स्टेट ने कई बार उनको रिहैबिलिटेट करने की कोशिश की, बट अभी भी शी इज़ अ वुमन इन वेटिंग फॉर जस्टिस।
तो आपने जिस विक्टिम को वो बचाने की कोशिश कर रही थी उसकी कहानी क्या है? उस समय 9 महीने की थी, अब 32 साल की है।
जी, तो बाई उस वक्त 9 महीने की थी, और एक गुज्जर फैमिली में पैदा हुई थी। और राजस्थान के जिस दौसा ज़िले में जहाँ ये घटना हुई थी वो बहुत पेट्रियार्कल भी और फ्यूडल भी है। और इन्हीं कास्ट कुम्हार्स हैं, कुम्हार भी ओबीसी ग्रुप है वहाँ पर, और गुजर भी ओबीसी हैं। लेकिन गुजर्स थोड़े से अफ्लुएंट हैं पॉलिटिकली, सोशली, उनके पास
भंवरी
लैंड भी
देवी
है।
की कास्ट क्या है?
कुम्हार है, वो पॉटर कास्ट है उनकी। और भंवरी एक सरकारी स्कीम से जुड़ी हुई थी। उस वक्त एक साथीन प्रोग्राम था, राजस्थान सरकार ने वो लॉन्च किया था कि वो ग्रामीण महिलाओं को लीडर्स बना सके। और अपने आप में
तो एक तरह से वो एक्टिविस्ट थी, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से एक्टिविस्ट थी।
जी, वो गवर्नमेंट के वो फुट सोल्जर थी। वो एक वुमेन्स डिपार्टमेंट के कैडर से आती थी। भंवरी उसकी शादी रुकवाने गई थी कि कलेक्टर साहब का आदेश है, मुख्यमंत्री जी ने ये कहा है कि
बाल विवाह को रोका जाए।
बिल्कुल,
चाइल्ड मैरिज शुड बी स्टॉप्ड।
और वही 9 महीने की बच्ची जो थी बाई, उसका नाम उस वक्त बाई नहीं था, उसका नाम उसके पेरेंट्स ने रखा था गल्ला। उसका मतलब होता है स्टॉप, इनफ, हमें और बच्ची नहीं चाहिए, क्योंकि वो अपने घर में 9th चाइल्ड थी, 9वीं बच्ची थी, इसलिए उसका नाम ऐसा रखा गया।
So did they go on producing more and more babies?
नहीं, वो लास्ट थी।
No, until then they'd gone on producing more because they wanted more boys?
नहीं, बॉयज़ और गर्ल्स सारे थे, बट उन्होंने रोका नहीं। 9वीं बच्ची तक, आखिर तक उन्होंने फिर रोका। और उसका नाम स्कूल में भी उसको भेजा, तो 5वीं के बाद उसका ड्रॉप आउट हो गया, क्योंकि उस वक्त स्कूल में गर्ल्स एजुकेशन का भी यही हाल था। स्कूल में वो मन भारी बन गई। उसका भी बड़ा ही सैड सा मीनिंग है कि हैवी हार्ट, दिल बस हो गया हमारा। यस, मन भारी। और फिर 17 साल की उसका गौना कर दिया, ससुराल चली गई। फिर उसका नाम रख दिया बाई देवी। बाई का मतलब होता है जस्ट अ गर्ल, कोई उसका मीनिंग नहीं है। तो ये उसकी लाइफ के बारे में बताता है।
She had no entity of her own.
Yes.
Just like a number.
जी, और ऐसे उसकी लाइफ थी। वो भंवरी और वो दोनों आमने सामने बहुत बार आए। उसी गांव में भंवरी रहती थी, उसी गांव में वो अक्यूज्ड रहते थे, तो दे केम फेस टू फेस मैनी टाइम्स, बट उन्होंने कभी बात नहीं की आपस में, क्योंकि बाई हमेशा उससे नफरत करते हुए पली बड़ी।
So what happens? Let me try and explain that you marry off a woman, a girl, at say 9 months in this case.
जी,
But she's taken away by the groom when she reaches a certain age, right? And
yes.
which in her case was 17.
17
तो 17
की वो चली गई। और
but why did she hate Bhamri Devi?
Because
Bhamri
Bhamri filed a case against her father, her uncles. तो उसको वो नफरत थी कि मेरे पिताजी और अंकल्स को उसने जेल भेज दिया रेप केस में। तो पूरे गांव ने कभी भरोसा नहीं किया कि भंवरी wasn't lying। उनको लगा कि भंवरी तो झूठ बोल रही है, और ऐसा ही बाई को भी लगता रहा। तो बाई की कहानी है कि she grew up hating भंवरी देवी, the feminist icon we all got from the 90s.
Yeah. So she got no gratitude
No.
from the person who she was fighting for.
Yes.
Now what is the lesson that you draw from this? क्या सबक इससे आप देखते हैं लोगों को मिलेगा? लोग कहेंगे तो कुछ करिए नहीं यार, ठीक, आप ठीक से जिसके लिए कर रहे हो वही आपसे खुश नहीं है, वही आपसे नाराज़ है।
जी, मतलब कुछ लड़ाइयाँ बहुत लंबी लड़ाइयाँ होती हैं। भंवरी का जैसा हमने स्टोरी में लिखा कि भंवरी गॉट अ बिग कैनवस। उसने वो कुम्हार, गुज्जर और उस बाई से परे उसकी एक अपनी पहचान बन गई, और वो इतनी बड़ी फेमिनिस्ट आइकन हमारे लिए बनकर निकली। तो इंडिविजुअली सफरिंग रह जाती है, लेकिन लड़ाइयाँ बड़ी लड़ी भी जाती हैं और जीती भी जाती हैं। तो थैंक्स टू भंवरी की हमें विशाखा गाइडलाइंस और एक ऐसा लॉ मिला जो हमें वर्क प्लेस पे सेक्सुअल हैरेसमेंट के खिलाफ प्रोटेक्ट करता है।
So does Bhamri understand this?
Yes.
Does she understand the impact she has had? The good impact she has had?
जी, भंवरी को पता है, बट अभी अपनी उम्र के इस पड़ाव पे वो थोड़ी बिटर हैं, और अपनी फैमिली के उस थिएटर में अब वो फंस गई हैं। तो शी इज़ अ बिट बिटर, लेकिन अभी भी उनकी लास्ट विश ये है कि शी शुड गेट जस्टिस।
सो भंवरी के परिवार में आपकी स्टोरी में लिखा है,
जी।
आप समझाइए कि भंवरी के परिवार में इसके बाद क्या हुआ, भंवरी के साथ कैसा सलूक हुआ?
भंवरी के जो बच्चे थे वो उसी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में पले बढ़े, उनके साथ भी बहुत डिस्क्रिमिनेशन हुआ, उन्हें सोशली बाइकआउट कर दिया गांव में, तो वो पले बढ़े उसमें। लेकिन बाद में उनका जो एक, जितना मुझे समझ में आया, जितना मैंने उनके साथ टाइम बिताया, तो वो बहुत मॉनेटरी बेनिफिट्स में फंस गए। वो लोग भी अब उस कॉज से परे होते चले गए, और जो लैंड मिली उन्हें या जो कॉम्पनसेशन मिला उसमें वो फंस गए। और अपनी ही माँ के लिए जो एक रेप विक्टिम है, तो इस खराब भाषा का इस्तेमाल करना, तो फैमिली डिस्प्यूट बहुत अगली हो गया।
और हस्बैंड के साथ भी?
जी नहीं, हस्बैंड के साथ उनकी शुरुआती दौर की ये मुझे एक एक्टिविस्ट जो थी, जिन्होंने भंवरी का 30 साल से साथ दिया, उन्होंने बताया कि शुरुआत में दिक्कतें थी, क्योंकि वो भी एक गांव से निकला आदमी था, वो उसी सोसाइटी में था, तो उनकी अपनी इंटीमेट रिलेशनशिप में बहुत ही दिक्कतें आई। फाइनली उसने एक्सेप्ट कर लिया दैट शी वाज रेप्ड इन फ्रंट ऑफ मी, सो भंवरी इज एज प्योर एज गोल्ड। तो ये बात उन्होंने स्वीकार कर ली, लेकिन टाइम
तो
लगा।
वो ठीक हुआ। लेकिन ये जो बाई देवी है, इसने कभी इस बात को स्वीकार नहीं किया।
नहीं, कॉन्ट्राडिक्शंस में रहने वाली महिला है। और वो कभी, जैसे हमने बाई का जो इंटरव्यू लिया है, उसमें बताया कि वो अपने पड़ोस की किसी महिला के बारे में बात करेगी कि वो पुलिस में लग गई, लेकिन मैं 5th तक पढ़ पाई। फिर एट द सेम टाइम वो डिफेंड भी करेगी चाइल्ड मैरिज, क्योंकि हमारा कस्टम है। तो एक जो ऑर्डिनरी इंडियन वुमन है जो इस तरह के कॉन्ट्राडिक्शंस में जीती है, तो बाई का किरदार वैसा ही है।
तो यहाँ 2 भारतीय महिलाएं हैं।
जी।
देयर आर 2 इंडियन वुमेन। वन इज ईच वन in her way is carrying the burden of patriarchy.
Yes.
One as an activist who did not get her due
Justice.
from society, law, and the family also. And the other who ended up getting married off at 9 months
9
of
months
age,
old.
was forced to drop off from school in class 5,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And is now reduced to this. So दोनों अलग अलग तरह से, हालांकि opposite sides में है fence के,
जी।
they are on the opposite sides of this fence,
Yes.
but both are victims of patriarchy.
Yes. Yes.
तो ज्योति, before I let you go, you have a concluding line. थोड़ा अपना उसके बारे में बताइए, क्या सोचती हैं, आपने क्या सीखा इससे, क्योंकि बहुत ट्रॉमेटिक स्टोरी है करने के लिए।
भंवरी की कहानी से और बाकी भी जो रेप विक्टिम्स हैं, 30-year-old केसेस या 50-year-old केसेस, तो यही समझ में आया कि हमें फ्यूचर जनरेशन को ये जानना बहुत ज़रूरी है कि इन औरतों ने क्या प्राइस पे किया है इंस्टीट्यूशंस और फैमिली और सोसाइटी से फ़ाइट करते करते। और वो प्रोसेसेस भी एग्जामिन करना भी बहुत ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि वंस दैट केस इज़ रिपोर्टेड, उसके अलावा बहुत कुछ होता है। तो ये कहानी उन्हीं सारी इनजस्टिसेस को लेकर आती है सामने।
ज्योति, आपने बहुत अच्छी स्टोरी करी, और आप भी सभी स्टोरी पढ़िए। प्लीज़ रीड दिस स्टोरी। आई विल शेयर विद यू लिंक्स इन इंग्लिश एंड ऑल्सो इन हिंदी। प्लीज़ डू रीड दिस, एंड ऑल्सो दिस गिव्स यू एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ हाउ ग्राउंड रिपोर्टिंग इज डन. Because it's one thing, I know that everybody gets fed up of the media, and it's very fashionable these days to abuse the media and paint them all with the same brush. But what you watch on your TV channels in the evening at prime time, please don't confuse that with journalism or the media. Doesn't matter whether it's a channel or an anchor who you agree with or who you hate, or you agree with or disagree with, who you hate or who you adore, who you would boycott or some other side would boycott, because everybody would boycott somebody. All that does not define journalism. What stories like this tell us is the real potential and strength of journalism, and I'm so glad that it's alive. Not because the print is there. The print is there as a platform, and we have great editors who enable reporters, but also because we have really fine reporters, and Jyoti Yadav is one of them. So thank you, Jyoti.
Thank you, sir.